Since 2016, Terrifier has been exciting and grossing out audiences with the gory and glee-ridden exploits of its infamous antagonist, Art the Clown, the most exciting horror movie villain to grace screens in the last 10 years, this side of Pennywise. Today, we'll take a spoiler-free look at techniques filmmaker Damien Leone used to bring Terrifier to life and identify 3 positive aspects of the film that work to elevate this from similar genre offerings, as well as 3 negative aspects that ultimately keep Terrifier from becoming a true classic. Plus 1 bonus positive, just for funsies. Join me, Jason Peters from Esoterica Cinema, in this episode of Arrows Up, Arrows Down for Terrifier. Our first arrow up is surprisingly strong photography. Now, this is not meant as a knock against director of photography George Stuber, but rather to acknowledge that low-budget horror simply doesn't typically have the resources for significant lighting packages and complex camera movement. In Terrifier, though, Stuber brings a superb sense of mood with his high-contrast photography during the death and terror scenes. Now, I will admit that I found the coverage of the actors to be kind of soft, which, while perhaps smoothing out their features, also gives the movie somewhat of an unwanted television feel at times, not dissimilar from shows like Criminal Minds. But Stuber isn't afraid to shy away from bodies and blood, and he gets his camera right up in the gore and viscera of Art the Clown's depraved and gruesome killings. Our first arrow down is for an unintelligent, underdeveloped screenplay. I'm sorry to say. One of the cheapest ways a filmmaker can execute their film is to have characters make unreasonable and unintelligent decisions. Unfortunately, low-budget horror is traditionally rife with this trope, and Terrifier is no different. Kicks off with the, 2 pretty drunk girls stumble down an alley they have no business being in, nobody else is around anywhere to see, right? And from there, they progress to this, dingy apartment complex where most of the film takes place. The characters speak in clunky dialogue that represent the broad cliches that the characters themselves are painted with, features the likes of arrogant, verbally disparaging TV personality, and crazy homeless lady who is also inexplicably clairvoyant. I don't know where those tropes come from. They're lazily drawn characters in a film that's littered with them. As a matter of fact, despite having absolutely no dialogue or backstory whatsoever, Art the Clown is the richest and most dynamic character in the movie, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Arrow up, thrilling, effective sound design and score. The auditory engineering of this film is sneaky good. It does a lot of heavy lifting in establishing tone and theme that calls significant attention to itself, but in a way that feels very organic to the style and the presentation of this movie. The score is intentionally modeled after the graphic slasher films of the 80s, going all in on the droning synth tones and those crunchy modulated stabs that we absolutely love. We get the sense that the sound is a huge part of the film's DNA by design, as opposed to being an afterthought, right? And Terrifier is a better film for it. Now, I did research this and found out that while most of the departments like makeup, camera, and second unit only had 1 and sometimes 2 people, the sound department had a crew of 4, plus 1 additional person for music, which speaks to that emphasis that was placed on sound. Now, there is one unfortunate exception to the quality sound, and we'll explore this as we go on to our next arrow down, atrocious dialogue capture. I literally just got done speaking about how effective the sound design and the score was, so it's unfortunate to note just how bad the audio capture is. Most of the characters sound like they're being recorded in a giant empty can of soup. The voices are frequently thin and tinny and flat, and somehow the ADR is even worse than much of the live sound that was recorded, and it rarely matches the actors' facial movements, which makes me think of all those 60s Italian cinema spaghetti westerns, right?
So you and I are on the same side. We are amigos.
It's such a shame that the love and attention paid to the sounds of inanimate objects and non-diegetic sound was nowhere to be found when it came to representing the dialogue. Though I will be honest, with how painfully trite most of the dialogue is, perhaps that's not the travesty I'm making it out to be. Our final arrow up, entertainingly visceral practical special effects. Look, the fact is that reasons 1 through 7 to see Terrifier are for the death scenes, okay? They are brutal and gruesome and rather exceptionally crafted for such a modest budget. And writer-director Damien Leone, he also heads up the responsibilities as the FX lead and does an absolutely stellar job at that. He wisely chose to devote most of his resources financially to these scenes, and it shows in their effectiveness, making for memorably graphic deaths that are executed in highly creative ways. Most low budgies, let's be honest, they're content to give you 2, maybe 3 gory deaths, and then try and fail to deliver a compelling story for the remaining 75 minutes. And while Terrifier does succumb to the same trapping at times, it delivers as many as 8 death sequences, which is a huge number. And it's one that prevents the film from having to spend even more time on uninteresting storylines and characters. Which brings us to our final down arrow, acting and characterization. Again, I know this is a low-budget horror movie, and we've been conditioned to expect that the acting's gonna suck, but that really doesn't mean that it has to. From the unfortunate stereotypes that I listed earlier, to the unfortunate stereotypes I'm not even bothering to bring up, none of the characters leap off the page with anything so much as an iota of sympathetic interests. Each character gets one emotional beat to play, ranging from creepy to slutty. Go figure, right? Now, at least the film knows its roots. The actors themselves don't do anything to bring depth to the characters. They probably figure if the writer and director aren't, why should I, right? Now, the exception here is David Howard Thornton's characterization of Art the Clown, which is a phenomenal piece of physical acting. He's never saying a word and communicating only with his exaggerated facial expressions and body language, and he absolutely crushes his performance. Great job. Now, before we wrap, I do want to call out one bonus up arrow, and that is the character of Art the Clown. I didn't want to focus on him for the bulk of this feature, as most everyone is familiar with him by now, right? But the film absolutely succeeds on the back of him. Without Art the Clown, this would be little more than disposable trash, but the cartoonish nature of his performance, contrasted with the brutality of the killings, actually creates a really interesting dynamic that remains fresh across the film's 85 minutes and is worth the price of admission alone. If you enjoyed this feature on Terrrifier, consider subscribing to our channel and liking the video for more great cinematic content. For Esoterica Cinema, I'm Jason Peters, and this has been Arrows Up, Arrows Down. Keep appreciating film and enjoy the movies!